You spend your whole life trying to fit in, until one day you realize you were never meant to. True life begins the moment you meet the person you've been avoiding all along, yourself. You see, most of us go through life wearing masks. We shape ourselves according to what the world expects, what our families demand, what society rewards. We learn very early that acceptance often comes with a price, and that price is authenticity. We trade who we are for who we think we should be. We become actors in a play we never auditioned for, repeating lines written by others. But deep inside, there's a quiet resistance, a voice that whispers, "This isn't who I am," and that whisper grows louder the more we ignore it. We build our persona, that carefully constructed image we present to the world, to protect ourselves. It gives us safety, recognition, belonging, but it also traps us, because the more invested we become in maintaining that image, the further we drift from the truth of our being. We forget that the persona was meant to serve us, not define us. It was meant to be a bridge, not a prison. And somewhere behind that mask, behind the smiles we force and the words we rehearse, the real self waits, patient, silent, aching to be seen. Meeting yourself, truly meeting yourself, is not a comfortable journey. It demands courage, the kind of courage that can strip you bare. You must dare to question the identity you've built, the beliefs you've borrowed, and the fears you've inherited. You must look into the mirror and see not the version you show the world, but the soul behind the eyes. And that moment, that confrontation, is both terrifying and liberating, because when the mask falls, so does the illusion. Many people never reach that point. They spend their years performing roles, chasing applause, clinging to the security of their constructed selves. They confuse approval with purpose, reputation with meaning, but life does not begin in the applause. Life begins in the silence. When you finally stop pretending, when you dare to stand alone in your truth, that is when something within you awakens. That is when you begin to live. To meet yourself is to uncover both the light and the shadow. It is to recognize that within you exists not just what you admire, but also what you fear and reject. And yet it is only through embracing both that you become whole. You cannot know freedom if you are at war with yourself. You cannot know peace if half of your soul is locked away in shame. The journey from persona to authenticity is not about perfection. It's about integration. It's about letting your false self dissolve until only the real one remains. This meeting with the self transforms everything. Your relationships change because you no longer seek validation. Your choices change because you no longer act from fear. Your path changes because you begin to follow something deeper than ambition. You follow meaning, and when that happens, you begin to see the world differently. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. You no longer ask, "Who do they want me to be?" You ask, "Who am I, truly?" The world doesn't need more perfect masks. It needs more authentic souls. Souls that have met themselves, faced themselves, and chosen to live honestly. For only when you know who you are beneath the layers, only when you've met that unfiltered self, can you begin to touch the true essence of life. And in that moment when you finally meet yourself, you don't just discover who you are, you discover that you were never lost to begin with. There comes a moment in every human life when you realize that the enemy you've been fighting all along was never out there. It was within. We all carry within us a darkness we try to deny, a side of ourselves we fear, repress or judge. That darkness, my friends, is what Carl Jung called the shadow. It is the part of our being that holds the emotions we refuse to feel, the desires we're ashamed of, the anger we hide, and the wounds we never healed. And yet it is also the doorway to our greatest strength, our deepest wisdom and our most profound freedom. But most people run from their shadow. They build walls of righteousness and comfort to keep it buried. They say, "I am not angry, I am not jealous, I am not afraid," and in denying those truths, they give their shadow power. You see, what we suppress doesn't disappear, it festers. What we reject doesn't die, it hides. And when we refuse to confront it consciously, it controls us unconsciously. That's why we project our darkness onto others. We condemn in the world what we refuse to see in ourselves. We hate in others what we fear within. To embrace the shadow is not to celebrate evil. It is to understand that no human being is entirely light or entirely dark. We are a mixture of both. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your teacher. It reveals the parts of you that need compassion, not condemnation. It shows you where you have been wounded and where you have hidden your potential. Sometimes the shadow holds your creativity, your power, your boldness, the parts you locked away because someone once told you they were too much, too dangerous, too different. To face the shadow is to reclaim your wholeness. It requires honesty, brutal, radical honesty. You must be willing to sit in the discomfort of your own imperfection. You must be willing to admit that there are parts of you that can hurt and heal, build and break, love and fear, all at once. And it is through that confrontation that transformation begins. For no man or woman can rise into their full light without first descending into their own darkness. This journey is not easy. It demands humility. It demands that you stop pretending to be only good, only pure, only right, because true strength is not in denying your flaws. It is in understanding them. True morality is not the absence of darkness, but the mastery of it. When you can look at your shadow and say, yes, that too is me, you rob it of its power to control you. You turn it from a hidden enemy into a conscious ally. And once that happens, something extraordinary unfolds. Compassion deepens, not only for yourself, but for others. You begin to see that everyone you meet is also wrestling with their own unseen shadows. You stop judging so quickly, stop condemning so harshly, because you know what it means to be human, complex, imperfect, evolving. You realize that the people who hurt others are often those who have never faced the hurt within themselves. So, when you embrace your shadow, you don't become darker, you become more complete. You move beyond the shallow duality of good and bad, and you step into the fullness of what it means to be alive. You begin to live with integrity, with depth, with truth, and in that truth, there is freedom. Because the day you stop running from your shadow is the day you stop being afraid of your own soul. There is a point in life when the search for meaning becomes louder than the noise of the world. You begin to realize that the answers you've been seeking are not hidden in some distant place. They are buried within your own soul. This realization marks the beginning of what Jung called individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole. It is not a path toward perfection, but toward integration. It is the journey of gathering all the scattered pieces of yourself and bringing them home. Each of us is born with a potential, a unique pattern of being that waits to unfold, but somewhere along the way, we lose connection with that inner design. We get caught in imitation, trying to become what others admire, what society accepts, what culture defines as success. We wear borrowed values like ill-fitting clothes and call it identity. But there comes a time when the soul refuses to stay silent. It begins to whisper, to stir, to call you back to your true nature. That is the voice of individuation, the invitation to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Individuation is not a comfortable road. It's not a smooth climb up the mountain of self-awareness. It's a descent into the valley of truth. It requires you to meet every part of yourself, the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the wisdom and the wounds. You begin to see that everything within you has a purpose. Your anger teaches you where your boundaries lie. Your fear shows you what matters most. Your pain reveals your capacity for empathy. Individuation is not about erasing your struggles. It's about transforming them into understanding. And through that transformation, something powerful happens. You stop living reactively and start living consciously. You stop being a reflection of other people's expectations and become the author of your own existence. You no longer measure yourself against what you see outside. You measure yourself against the truth within. That is where real freedom begins. Because when you know who you are, you no longer need the world to tell you. But make no mistake, this process demands courage. It asks you to step away from the crowd, to stand in solitude, to face the silence that most people run from. The path of individuation is not loud or glamorous. It is quiet, inward, deeply personal. It is the slow unfolding of your authentic self, like a seed breaking through the soil toward the light. And when that inner growth begins, the outer world starts to change with it. You start to see meaning in everything. The challenges that once broke you now reveal their lessons. The relationships that wounded you show you where love needed to begin. Within yourself, you realize that life was never trying to punish you. It was trying to awaken you. Every pain, every loss, every failure was a teacher guiding you toward wholeness. And when you reach that place, when your inner and outer selves finally align, you feel a peace that no achievement can give. You understand that the true purpose of life is not to become someone else, but to remember who you already are beneath the noise, beneath the conditioning, beneath the fear. Because individuation is not the act of becoming more, it is the art of becoming real. There comes a time in your journey when you begin to awaken, not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual. You begin to see life, not just as a sequence of events, but as a mirror reflecting the state of your inner world. The world around you no longer feels random. It feels connected, alive, intentional. This awakening to inner consciousness is not an escape from reality. It is a deeper participation in it. It is the moment you realize that everything you've been searching for has always been living quietly inside you, waiting for your awareness to turn inward. Most people move through life half awake. They are caught in routine, driven by habits, opinions and fears that are not their own. They wake up each morning, but never truly wake up to themselves. They live reacting to circumstances, rather than creating from consciousness. And yet, there comes a point, sometimes through suffering, sometimes through stillness, when the veil begins to lift. You start to question, to feel, to notice the silence beneath the noise. You sense that you are more than your thoughts, more than your body, more than your history. That realization, that you are awareness itself, is the birth of true life. To awaken is to see with new eyes. You begin to understand that the world outside is a reflection of the world within. The anger you see, the chaos you experience, the patterns you repeat, they all point back to something unresolved inside you. When you become conscious of that truth, you stop blaming and start understanding. You stop running and start listening. Life becomes less about control and more about connection. Connection with your purpose, with your values, with your soul. But awakening does not mean retreating from the world. It means engaging with it more deeply, more truthfully. You start to bring awareness into every corner of your life, into how you speak, how you love, how you work, how you treat others. You begin to see that consciousness is not something reserved for meditation or silence. It's meant to live in your daily moments. It's how you choose patience over anger, truth over comfort, compassion over judgment. Every choice made with awareness becomes a prayer in motion. As consciousness awakens, you also begin to sense the deep unity that underlies all existence. You see that beneath the surface differences of race, belief, status, or background, we are all threads in the same divine fabric. You feel the pain of others as your own, because you recognize that their suffering echoes within you. This awareness softens the heart. It brings humility. It teaches you that awakening is not about being above anyone. It's about being connected to everyone. Yet this awakening is not a one-time event. It is a continuous unfolding, a daily returning to presence. There will be times when you drift back into old habits, old fears, old noise, but the awakened soul always finds its way home. Because once you have seen the light of your own consciousness, you can never fully return to sleep. And so, as you awaken, you begin to live not by reaction but by intention, not by fear but by faith. You become the calm in the storm, the light in the confusion, the stillness in the chaos. And from that inner stillness, your outer world begins to transform. For in the end, awakening to consciousness is not about finding a new life. It is about finally being alive in the one you already have. So when you strip away the noise, the masks, the fears, when you stop chasing who you think you should be, and finally meet the truth of who you are, That is when life truly begins. Not the life the world built for you, but the life your soul was born to live. Because in the quiet moment when you finally meet yourself, you don't just find meaning, you find freedom. And that, my friends, is when you stop merely existing and start truly living.